people tell tales of the legendary 1938 broadcast of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds on Orson Welles' Mercury Theater radio program. Legends state that there was rioting in the streets as people went mad with fear over the Martians invading, sadly having missed that this was a play put out in order to celebrate Halloween. Now, this is not quite true. There was not rioting in the streets and mass hysteria, but there were quite a few people fooled, which resulted in Wells himself having to break character and warn people who were listening that, hey, guys, chill, it's all pretend. As the dust settled into history, we've come to know the event was more like a percentage of listeners were fooled, which then began to deluge authorities with phone calls rather than stampedes. The small but loud group of people, already on edge because of the growing tensions of the world, gave the event a seeming wider scope than it actually had. After which, the news media, hungry for strife as always, took the story and ran with it, creating the now legendary tale of a country gripped with fear and panic over a small Halloween stunt. However, decades later, this event would be repeated across the pond in 1992 when the BBC broadcast the faux news special, Ghostwatch. Inspired by such classics as the Quatermass Experiment and conceived by writer Stephen Volk, Ghostwatch was originally to be a 6-part serial of a paranormal investigation into a haunted manor, culminating in the 6th part being a live broadcast from the residents as things go oblong. When producer Ruth Baumgarten doubted the story's potential to carry a miniseries, it was decided to do a 90-minute special instead. Set up as an actual live BBC One news special, and using 4 prominent BBC personalities of the time, Ghostwatch set the stage to again cause panic through unobservant viewers, just as War of the Worlds had accomplished decades prior. BBC presenter Michael Parkinson hosts the BBC One news special, Ghostwatch, dealing with a live, on-the-air investigation into a supposed poltergeist in the early household of Northolt, Greater London. On the scene, correspondent Sarah Green and her camera crew spend the evening with single mother Pamela and her daughters Susanna and Kim, who have a history with strange events in their home, from strange knocking, objects moving, and even mysterious wounds materializing on the children. In the studio is the parapsychologist Dr. Lynn Pascoe, who has been investigating the case. Over the course of the night, the crew begins to capture odd happenings and uncovering the legend of the resident poltergeist nicknamed Pipes. The writing is nothing spectacular, but it does quite well as a Halloween ghost story, based primarily on the Enfield poltergeist story from the late 70s, in which 2 sisters claimed a haunting. The pair of girls managed to fool several investigators with simple tricks such as ventriloquism and jumping on the bed to imitate levitation in still photographs, but still went on to become one of the most popularized accounts of haunting in the UK. This is one of Ghostwatch's strengths, in that all the terminology, evidence, and happenings mirror supposed real-life incidents. Watching this with no prior knowledge of its nature as fiction, one can easily see this as just another paranormal TV special that began to really explode at the time, and took firm hold the following year when a little Fox show called The X-Files debuted. And while it uses terminology, it never gets bogged down in trying to over-explain things with gibberish technobabble. There are references to motion sensors and heat vision cameras, but at no point do they ever present one piece of evidence for the haunting. A vast difference from a ghost story of its nature if it were made today, in which the story would be bogged down by EMFs and pseudoscience nonsense. But while this works for most of the story, towards the end it tends to stumble as Dr. Pascoe attempts to toss out explanations for things, reflecting less pseudoscience and more New Age mysticism. Sometimes it's best just to let events be and not attempt to explain them. The structure of the story also benefits things as it flows marvelously, beginning with a group of news people having fun with the idea of a little Halloween spook special, and gradually growing more and more strange over the course of the night. Act 1 being recounts of stories and generally setting up a meandering special that goes nowhere. Act 2 becoming a series of little pranks here and there, having them running about the house, jumping at shadows, and culminating in the reveal of the hoax. Only to have Act 3 go wild as all hell breaks loose. Each act being enjoyable on its own, combining into a wonderfully flowing narrative. That's not to say it's perfect. Some of it really goes nowhere, such as the psychic investigator who appears twice with zero impact on the story, other than to shrug and say, "I got nothing." And an ending that, well, entertaining and an interesting concept, will leave you with a bit of feeling of, well, that was kind of silly. A shortcoming overall, it will also bore you for much of the first 2 acts if you're not on board with the conceit of it being a genuine TV special, causing you to potentially miss some of the fun details. It is absolutely boring, but that's the point of it. setting a foundation to build some of its crazier ideas on. It does an excellent job creating an atmosphere of boring normality, of the same type of go-nowhere TV investigation you've probably seen dozens, if not hundreds of times before. So that as the genuine supernatural begins to encroach upon it, it's that much more effective. But it lays that underlying sense of weirdness so well that you are rewarded for giving it your attention in the face of its efforts to make you think nothing much is going on. An extremely hit-or-miss affair is the acting of the special. For all their efforts to sell the suspension of disbelief with the story and presentation, it's the acting that will give you the most trouble at many points. Our 4 BBC personalities do quite well selling the reality of the situation, as that's pretty much how you see real news personalities acting in such a special. Michael Parkinson doing quite well selling the nature of this as another pointless news special. A notable BBC presenter and host of his eponymous chat show, Parkinson is likely the reason so many people bought into this being a real special. Husband and wife duo Sarah Green and Mike Smith also do well. In particular Green, as she's arguably the main character of the piece, driving the story forward and being the first to jump into action. Doing well to sell the situation as she is both clearly scared, but hungry for the story. Her husband, the late Mike Smith, being a rather pointless side character who does little more than act baffled, and is ultimately inoffensive due to his limited presence. Which is for the best, as he never quite sells the fear for his wife. Then of course there's Craig Charles, who likely has the widest recognition outside the UK, most famous for his role on Red Dwarf as slacker screw-up protagonist extraordinaire Dave Lister. At first glance, a person familiar with Red Dwarf but not BBC television, such as myself, could be led to assume he insta-breaks the illusion of reality, particularly with his over-the-top antics. However, in context, he actually adds to it. Charles and Green both were notable children's show presenters for the BBC at the time. As a result, the pair of kid-friendly hosts led parents to assume this to be another lighthearted bit of fluff, only to result in giving their children nightmares, as this is so clearly not a special made for children. When you get outside those 4, things start to go downhill. Gillian Brevin, as Dr. Lynn Pascoe, does not do well in selling herself as a real parapsychologist. And part of the problem is that she is, at all times, clearly acting. It's not that she is a bad actress, but at all times, particularly since she's juxtaposed with Parkinson the most, she is plainly acting. The attempt in her character is to sell her as a professional who knows what she's talking about, but given the situation, she should be more unsure, misspeak more often, look nervous. Since the character is not supposed to be a host or TV personality, she should be more uncomfortable, but she's always on point in delivering her lines, taking charge of the program, and being a direct vehicle for info dumps that she breaks the suspension of disbelief. The family, too, suffers from the same issue, but being extra wooden, such as Brid Brennan as Pamela Early. Arguably, her acting goes towards the idea of selling the family as charlatans trying to pull a fast one. The wooden nature selling her as lying, but ultimately is more distracting as a particular acting choice than as a person trying to conceal something. Compare her, for example, with the neighbors Craig interviews, or the people sharing their experiences. They are uncomfortable, they fumble over words and go towards selling the illusion. Meanwhile, Brennan is clearly at all times delivering lines, much the same as Brevin. Her attempts at being real transform into being wooden rather than selling the idea of a single mother trying to maintain a reserved visage in the face of terrifying events. The less said about real-life sisters Michelle and Charisse Wesson as Kim and Suzanne Hurley, the better. Both, again, are clearly middling child actors playing a role, which, again, could sell the reveal of the hoax at the end of Act 2, but does not sell the duality of character, but is just a singular role for the inexperienced actors. The only time either of them are believable is during the taped interviews where the young Kim describes pipes in detail. One of the hardest things for an actor is to sell the idea of not being an actor. And in a performance of this nature, you have to unlearn some of the things that make good acting. Screwing up lines, projecting discomfort, and a lack of confidence. These would go a long way towards selling them as people rather than characters. When you're dealing with the 4 BBC personalities, the effect is pitch perfect. But every time we shift to one of the actors, the special falls flat on its face. Directed by Leslie Manning, this aspect is where Ghostwatch shines. The nature of this being a BBC special is rarely lost, with nearly every shot adding to the feeling of this being a genuine broadcast. Anyone who has seen documentary shows of the era would see familiarity in how everything is staged, quick and almost haphazardly, but truly is anything but. There are times when the effect is blown by being a little too overzealous and showmanlike with certain shots, such as the dramatic dimming of the studio lights during the recording scene, or some later shots inserted clumsily to have the information there, rather than working it into what natural camera angles the show should have. But these moments are only something you'd catch with a critical eye later on, while dissecting the show for what it is. Being enveloped in the story for a first-time viewer, in particular the children who witnessed it upon the first airing, these details can be easily overlooked with the rest of the effort on display. In particular is the brilliant Where's Waldo nature of Pipes the Ghost, or Where's Wally for you UK viewers out there, appearing hidden around the frame over the course of the movie, gone unnoticed by our characters for the most part. With 8 confirmed appearances and up to 13 possible in total, just paying attention to every detail of the frame can be a fun and rewarding hunt every time you catch a hidden glimpse of the sinister poltergeist. We know something the characters don't. We question if we saw what we think we saw, and this adds to the skin-crawling glory of effective horror at work. If Ghostwatch did nothing else right, the skill at hiding information in plain sight is something more horror movies could learn from. Sound is one of the biggest tools you have in horror, and Ghostwatch does not disappoint here. Pounding, breathing, equipment malfunctions, and the otherworldly mewing of demonic cats contribute to the hair-raising creep building over the course of the special. The voice of malicious poltergeist Pipes being particularly memorable, but where it truly excels is when it knows to be quiet. A door slowly opening, terrified phone calls with no sound other than the actor speaking. The most effective part is, other than the intro, the special uses no music whatsoever. No jump stings or overblown melodramatic orchestrations here. All tools poor horror directors misuse and overuse. The total lack of music here driving home the reality of things and making things far more unsettling than an ever-present score would. A quick music sting can make us jump, but total silence can make our skin crawl. If the special set out to fool people, it worked spectacularly. The special was almost canceled before it even aired due to the network's fears of people believing it was a real report, insisting on there being a banner proclaiming it as a drama, as well as opening credits. That didn't work. The network was bombarded with phone calls from viewers angry and terrified that what they were seeing was real, tuning in a little too late to see the Screen 1 bumper just before the show. Just as listeners had with War of the Worlds decades earlier. The next day, the BBC was hammered by the media for many of the more disturbing scenes. As a result of the special, numerous cases were reported of people suffering psychological effects. The most notable being 18-year-old Martin Denham, who committed suicide after viewing the special and believing the knocking of the pipes in his own home to be a genuine ghost. His parents would go on to petition the Broadcasting Standards Commission, accusing the program of hypnotizing him into obsession. Well, the BSC would refuse this and numerous other petitions. The British High Court of Justice forced them to hear the Denhams' complaint. The BSC in turn ruled that the special was excessively disturbing and graphic, that the producers deliberately cultivated a sense of menace, and by casting notable children's program presenters, it caught parents off guard and unable to judge the program as unfit for their children before it was too late. The producers claimed, rightly so, that not only was it aired in the drama programming slot, more efforts to inform the viewer of its fictional nature would have harmed the effectiveness of the special. Even the genuine BBC call-in number displayed during the special had a pre-recorded message informing people of the fictional nature of the program, but they would ultimately go on to apologize after the BSC's ruling. This, of course, would not be the end, as cases for post-traumatic stress disorder in children was claimed and ultimately dismissed in the years following its airing. In turn, due to the nature of the controversy, Ghostwatch was banned from the airwaves, having never re-aired on TV in the UK. It was not until the 10th anniversary in 2002 that it re-emerged from the BBC vaults and received an official VHS and DVD release. Though having little impact outside the UK, one can still see its influence on the horror genre and others like it to this day. The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity to name but 2 series that owe it a debt, though the found footage genre itself goes back much further. Ghostwatch is very much a product of the 90s, a nearly pitch-perfect recreation of the paranormal specials that plagued the airwaves that decade. More so, watching it today in our oversaturated reality TV 24/7 news coverage world, it feels oddly prescient, especially given how we have so many genuine ghost hunting shows now. Even without the context of all the UK TV personalities, or the 90s television landscape, still works as a creepy little Halloween tale. Hell, even the panic and terror it unintentionally spread through its ill-informed viewing audience is a fascinating event unto itself. Up there with the legendary Orson Welles prank we had here in the US. Though hard to find given its Region 2 only releases, if you can appreciate the boring parts as a segment of the effective storytelling, and can look past some of the less than stellar acting, you'll find a film well worth the view, with some genuine creepiness that will affect you on repeat viewings, and a clever premise that foretold the changing face of the genre. Ghostwatch is an underappreciated little horror gem that deserves some more exposure. Go ahead and give it some love this Halloween, but do be careful not to skip the opening and ending credits, else you find yourself in the same state of troubled sleep and panicked phone calls as the UK viewers it made such a lasting impression upon.